The air in the forest was so still that even my breath seemed too loud. A pale fog clung to the trees, wrapping them in ghostly veils that stretched on forever. I remember the way the light flickered, like an old bulb struggling against the darkness, pulsing faintly, but never enough to chase the shadows away. The earth beneath my boots was soft, damp, and it carried the faint smell of moss, wet stone, and something faintly metallic, like rust. I had been walking for hours, but the woods never changed. Every path felt the same, every turn led me deeper. That's when I saw it, an old church standing crooked in the fog. Its wooden beams groaned with every shift of the wind. The windows were dark, but I swear I saw something move across the glass. I should have turned back, but curiosity pulled me closer. The silence pressed against my ears, broken only by the faint hum of something unseen, something waiting. I stepped through the broken gate, and the air grew heavier, colder, almost alive. The church seemed to breathe, its shadows stretching and recoiling like they didn't want me there. My hand touched the door, and in that moment I felt it. Something ancient watching from inside. I never should have opened the door. The village was quiet that autumn. Fog hung over the fields, soft and low, as if the earth itself was breathing. At the edge of the town stood the church, its stone walls blackened by time, its tower leaning slightly, like it had grown tired of keeping watch. People never went near it anymore. Children were warned away. Even stray animals seemed to circle wide, avoiding the shadow it cast. They said the bell hadn't rung in centuries. The rope long rotted. The clapper inside rusted and still, but still, it remained there, suspended in silence, waiting. I didn't believe much in stories. Old buildings creak. Wind travels strange through stone, and yet something about that tower unsettled me. The windows hollow and black. The cross at the peak bent as though bowed under some unseen weight. That night, the fog was heavier than usual. It clung to my coat, wrapped around my shoes. The trees whispered against each other as I passed beneath them, and then I heard it, a single toll, deep, low, resonant enough to stir the air around me. I stopped walking. My breath caught. The sound faded into the fog, but it had been real. The bell, the one that hadn't rung in centuries. Another strike followed, slower this time. Drawn out, I looked to the tower, its windows still dark. The shape of the bell barely visible through the mist of the high opening. And yet, the toll did not come from above. It seemed to shiver up through the ground beneath my feet, like something heavy had struck the soil. Not the sky. The third toll arrived, closer. A vibration carried through the earth. The stones in the path rattled lightly against each other. I backed away from the church, but the fog closed tighter. Every tree was just a shadow. Every shape seemed to lean toward me. The fourth toll echoed under my ribs. I felt it in my chest more than in my ears, like something calling from below. The silence that followed was worse. My footsteps didn't dare disturb it. The whole village seemed to be listening. I glanced up at the tower again. The bell was still, its edges jagged with rust, a husk unmoving. And yet the ground quivered again, a fifth toll, crawling through the roots of the earth. As if the soil itself had a heartbeat, I couldn't stay. I turned down the lane, walking faster now. But the fog was heavy, and the tolls followed. 6, 7, each one deeper. Each one nearer, not from the church anymore, but beneath the road, beneath the fields, beneath me. I thought of the old stories then. How they said the church was built over ruins. How there had once been an older chapel, swallowed by the ground. No one knew why the bell was left hanging, why it never rang. Until tonight, the 8th toll shook the branches above me. Leaves drifted down in silence. I froze, waiting for the 9th, but none came. Only stillness, only fog, only the sense that something had heard something, was listening back. I walked the rest of the way home without lifting my eyes. The village was dark, doors shut, windows closed tight. When I reached my bed, I pulled the blanket over me like a shield. But even then, in the hollow silence of the night, I could feel the echo, low and steady beneath the floorboards. Like an answer, the church was abandoned. At least, that's what everyone said. Stone walls leaned inward, tired, like old bones. Glassless windows stared blankly into the gray evening. I had walked past it dozens of times, but that night, the doors were open. A pale draft slipped through the cracks. Cold, carrying the faint smell of wet ash and dust. I stepped inside. The wooden floor bent softly under my weight. Boards sighed. Dry leaves scattered like paper across the aisle. That's when I noticed the candles. Dozens of them. Thin sticks of wax lined along the pews, every one of them burning. Their flames swayed gently, as though breathing with the empty air. Wax fell in pale rivulets, dripping, pooling onto warped wood, but there was no smoke, no warmth, only a low hum that rose and fell, hidden beneath the silence. I froze at the threshold. No one had passed me. No one had entered. And still, the room glowed. I told myself it was a prank, that someone must be hiding. But the longer I listened, the more I realized the hum was not machinery or wind. It was voices, soft broken, layered together, like old prayers, half remembered, half forgotten. I took a step closer. The flames bent toward me one by one, like heads turning. My hand brushed the back of a pew. Wood splintered under my skin. It was damp, as though touched moments ago. I sat down. I don't know why. It felt wrong to keep standing. The whispers slipped closer, moving between the pews, curling in the gaps, nesting in the rafters above. Names surfaced in them, not words, but shapes of sound that pressed against my ear, like a memory trying to form. I closed my eyes. And for a moment the room pulsed, as though the church itself had taken a breath. The nearest candle flickered. Its flame rose tall, then vanished. One by one they followed, each light bowing out until only a single flame remained. The hum deepened, quieter now but closer. I could feel it on my skin. Wax dripped faster. The last flame trembled, and then darkness. The church inhaled again. The silence was so sharp I could hear the blood in my ears. I tried to stand, but something pressed against my shoulder. Not hard, not violent, just present. The pews creaked. Every row, one after another, like bodies shifting into place. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, humid with something sour. Shapes began to rise from the shadows. Not clear, not flesh, just weight, sitting where no one should be. I felt eyes, countless eyes, drawn toward the aisle, waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't. The silence grew heavier, until it became sound itself. And then, somewhere in the farthest row, I heard it. A soft exhale, human, nearer than I wanted it to be. I lowered my head, afraid to look. The darkness did not shift. The pews did not empty, and the air, though cold, felt crowded. I left my hand on the wood beside me, and it pulsed, faintly warm, as if someone else's hand was still resting there. I don't remember leaving. Only the night air and the steady echo of footsteps. That did not match my own. The church doors closed behind me, on their own, and when I glanced back through the broken window, the pews were filled. Every seat taken, every face turned toward the altar, silent, waiting. And all of them, burning faintly, like the afterglow of extinguished candles. The church was empty. It always felt colder inside than out. Even in summer, the air held a damp stillness. Like the walls were keeping something in. The windows were the only color left. Most were cracked. Some shattered long ago. But one remained, the one with the red glass. It stood above the altar, a tall, narrow panel broken in places, yet still whole enough to hold a figure. By day, the sunlight through it bled onto the floor, a red pool across the stone. It looked more like a wound than light, and by night, the glass glowed on its own. I never believed the stories. The villagers spoke about it in lowered voices, said it had been there longer than memory, said the glow wasn't reflection or moonlight, that it came from within the glass itself. The first time I stayed late, I felt it, the faint shimmer in the corner of my vision. I thought my eyes were adjusting. I thought it was a trick, but the glow deepened. A faint red haze spilled across the empty pews, and the shards on the floor, the broken fragments, caught it too. They pulsed as if breathing. I told myself it was my mind. The fatigue of silence, the pressure of being alone in such a hollow space. But then I saw the figure. At first it was just the shape of a man, tall, robed, faceless, etched into the red panel like a saint. But saints don't move. Its head tilted, a fraction, just enough for me to know it was looking back. I froze, my breath shallow. The pew wood beneath my hand felt damp, as though someone had just risen from that place. The figure's eyes were hollow circles, nothing inside them. Yet in the faint glow I felt stripped bare. The shards at my feet shifted, a soft crackle. Not breaking, but settling. Like something had disturbed them. I dared not move. The glow spread further, crawling along the floor, up the steps, into the walls. The entire church seemed red. I blinked, and for a moment it wasn't the church at all. The ceiling was gone. The walls bled into shadows. The glow cast only on me and the figure. It was no longer trapped in the glass. It leaned forward. Still inside its frame, but pressing through. The surface shimmered like liquid. The silence was unbearable. Not even the hum of the old lights remained. Just the low throb of the glow. I thought it might reach me, step free, as if the stained glass was nothing more than a door. But it didn't. It stopped, with its face nearly touching the inside of the panel. Hollow eyes locked to mine, and then stillness. The glow softened. The shards lost their breath. The haze retreated back to the glass, until all that remained was the faint outline of the figure, unmoving, empty, cold. I left the church without turning my back to it, every step echoing against the stone, every shadow lengthened by the fading red light. Outside, the night was pale and ordinary. Crickets in the grass, wind moving through the trees, but my skin still burned, like I had stood too close to fire, and when I closed my eyes, I could still see it, pressed against the glass, waiting, and I wondered, if it saw me once, would it always remember? It was late. The kind of late when the streets go quiet, and even the dogs have stopped barking. I had left the chapel doors open, just a crack, to let the air move through. The night breeze slipped inside. It carried something else with it, a hum. No, not a hum. Voices, low, blended, like a hymn whispered through fog. I stood at the doorway. My hand rested against the heavy wood. The faint singing grew clearer, pulling me in. The stone floor felt cold beneath my shoes as I stepped inside. The sound didn't come from anywhere I could name. It seemed to float like dust caught in moonlight. I paused halfway down the aisle. The pews looked darker than they should have. And at the front, the choir stood, rows of them, robes faded with age, faces pale, hands folded neatly, every one of them facing forward. They weren't singing. Their mouths didn't move. They were still, silent. Yet the music swelled around me, clear and sorrowful, a hymn I didn't know, but felt like I should. I moved closer, though I don't remember deciding to. The air grew colder the nearer I came. I could see their eyes, open but unfocused. A shiver traced down my spine. I stopped at the altar. The wind shifted, and just like that, the singing stopped. Silence pressed against the stone walls, heavy, breathless, the kind of silence that isn't empty. But watching, I tried to step back, but my feet felt heavy. The choir was still there, still frozen in their places. Not one blink, I whispered to myself, to break it, but the faint echo didn't belong to me. It came from the rafters above. Repeating what I said, the breeze passed again, gentle, moving the curtains near the stained glass. And with it, the hymn returned, not from the choir, not from above. It was everywhere. It bled from the walls. The stone itself seemed to carry the notes. Soft, layered, impossible. I pressed my hand to the wall, cold, but vibrating, as if the stone had lungs. The hymn grew louder, circling the space. Each note a weight, each voice familiar, like echoes of names I'd forgotten. I looked back at the choir. Still unmoving, yet something shifted. Their robes swayed, though the air was still. Shadows beneath them stretched too long across the floor. Reaching toward me, the wind died again, and silence returned. I stood in the middle of the chapel, afraid to breathe. Even the shadows froze. The choir's eyes seemed brighter in the dim, as if the moonlight had settled in them. I waited, for a sound, for movement, for anything to break, but nothing came, until one voice, faint, a single note. Floating from behind me, I turned. The pews were empty, only darkness. When I faced the altar again, the choir was gone. The moonlight fell on bare stone steps. Dust where their feet should have been. Stillness that felt deeper than before. But the walls, they still hummed. Soft, like a throat holding back a song. I left the chapel doors open that night. The hymn followed me out into the cold. So faint I thought I could forget it, but in the silence of my own room, I could still hear it, not in the air. Not through the walls, inside me, and when I stopped to listen, it wasn't one voice anymore. It was a choir. The church was empty that night, cold stone, candles barely holding their flame. I had stayed behind, long after the others had gone. The silence in those pews always felt heavy, like something resting on my shoulders. But I kept walking, toward the confessional. It was an old one, dark oak, iron hinges dulled with age. No one had used it for years, and yet I always felt watched when I passed. The little door on the left side, where you were meant to kneel, had been sealed shut. Not locked, sealed. Wood pressed tight into the frame, almost as if the church itself had grown around it. I never questioned it, until that night. The clock in the tower struck midnight. The sound rolled through the rafters, long and hollow, and then scratching from inside. At first faint, a restless drag of nails on wood. I froze, listening. I told myself it must be mice, but it was steady, patterned, as though something inside wanted to be heard. I stepped closer. The scratching stopped. Silence. Thick and waiting. Then, breathing slow, uneven, just on the other side of the door. I could almost feel it pressing against the wood, each inhale pulling the air thinner around me. I should have turned back. I should have walked out into the night. But I leaned closer. The grain of the oak was rough beneath my fingertips, cool, unyielding. I pressed my ear against it, and the breath deepened, as if whoever or whatever was inside had been waiting for me, a pause. And then it whispered my name, soft, broken, like a secret said through teeth that barely moved. My body locked in place. The voice was mine, not exactly, but close enough. It curled the name into my ear in a way no stranger ever could. I whispered back, "Who's there?" No answer, just the scrape of wood again, and the faintest shift like someone kneeling or standing. Moving inside that space no one should be able to enter. My breath fogged against the polished surface. I backed away, but the silence followed me. It felt as though the air itself had closed in, pressing from every corner of the church. No matter where I stood, I could sense the door, pulling. I turned away, and yet I swore I heard it, a whisper that trailed behind me. My name. Again. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the confessional, the sealed frame bending, splintering, something crawling free. By morning, I told myself it had been a dream. I even laughed at the thought of my own voice echoing back at me. But when I returned to the church, the priest was pale, tired. He told me someone had broken in during the night. Nothing was stolen. But the confessional, the sealed door stood open, as if it had never been shut at all. The wood around the frame was torn, not like it had been forced from the outside, but as though it had been pushed out, and on the floor inside, only dust, and two pale impressions in the kneeler, as if someone had been waiting there a very long time. That night, I swore never to listen again, never to press my ear against things meant to stay closed. But sometimes in the quiet, when the clock strikes midnight, I hear it. That same soft breath leaning close, whispering my name, and every time I regret answering, it was late winter. The church had been empty for weeks. I walked inside only because the door was left ajar. swinging gently with the wind. The air was colder inside than outside. The pews were lined with dust, and at the front, on the pulpit, lay a single Bible. Its cover was faded, almost gray instead of black. The edges curled like burnt paper. Something about it drew me closer, though I didn't want to touch it. I reached out anyway. The leather felt dry, brittle. When I lifted it, the weight seemed wrong. I opened the book, but the pages weren't there. Every sheet had been cut away, leaving a hollow cavity inside. At the center of the hollow lay a bundle, wrapped in thin, stained cloth, yellowed with age, but damp. I shouldn't have unwrapped it, but my fingers moved slowly, carefully. The cloth unfurled like old skin peeling back. Inside was something that should not have been there. A shape, smooth, round at first glance, but then it shifted. It pulsed, soft, steady, like a heartbeat. I froze, holding it between my palms. It wasn't stone. It wasn't wood. It was warm. I listened. The silence of the church pressed down around me. But from that object came a faint hum, not a voice. Not quite. More like a vibration deep inside the walls. I wanted to set it down, but each time it pulsed, I felt my own chest answer, as though my heart had aligned with it. I looked back at the Bible. The hollow seemed deeper now. Dark, as if it tunneled down into the wood beneath. I placed the object back inside, but it didn't rest. It twitched. The cloth slid from it. I saw veins, thin, pale blue lines stretching across its surface. They glowed faintly in the candlelight. And then, the pulsing grew louder, not in sound, but inside my head I staggered back. My breath shook. The pews creaked, though I hadn't touched them. Something was moving, not in sight, but in the air. The shadows along the ceiling stretched lower. The Bible closed by itself, slowly, softly. I stood frozen, watching the cover settle. The heartbeat didn't stop. I could still feel it. Even with the book shut tight, I should have left. But I waited, and when the silence finally settled again, it wasn't complete. I realized something. The pulsing hadn't ended. It had only moved. I pressed my hand against my chest. My own heart felt heavier, as though something foreign had nested inside it. The Bible lay still, closed, but I couldn't shake the thought that the thing I had touched was no longer inside the hollow pages. It was inside me now, beating, slowly, in rhythm with mine. And every time I breathe, I feel it listening. The chapel had been empty for decades. Its roof sagged under moss, its windows fractured by storms. But still, it stood at the far end of the graveyard, a shell of stone holding on against time. I would walk past it most evenings. The air around it always felt colder. Even when the summer nights were heavy with heat, the chapel exhaled a chill. One evening I stopped. The sky was pale with a sinking moon. Through the cracked glass I saw dust suspended, tiny specks frozen in the last strands of light. And then, something moved. Inside, the organ stood against the far wall. Its pipes reached upward like a forest of bones. The bench below was bare, yet the keys, they pressed down, a single note. Low, hollow. It shivered through the air, rattling the glass in its frame. I thought maybe it was the wind, maybe the shifting wood, but the note bent, stretched, and slid into another, a hymn, played backwards. Each note dragged into the next, like words spoken in reverse. The pipes shook with a breathless roar, but no one sat at the keys. I stepped closer to the door. The wood was warped, swollen from years of rain. Still, I leaned against it. The hymn grew louder. It wasn't music, not anymore. It was warning. Every chord scraped against me like something trying to peel sound from silence. I held my breath. The air smelled of stone, of damp wood, of old ash, and beneath it, something sharp, like copper. The keys slammed harder, each strike echoing across the pews. But then, as I stared through the crack in the door, I saw dust scatter. Shadows moved across the wall, not from moonlight, not from me. Something pale shifted in the chapel, too quick, too thin to see clearly. The hymn faltered, It staggered like fingers slipping, and then silence. The last note trembled in the pipes longer than it should have. It stretched until it broke. I pressed my hand to the door. The wood was cold, colder than the air, like the organ itself had soaked the warmth from the chapel. I whispered into the crack, though I don't know why. There was no answer, only a breath. Drawn in from the dark, I stepped back. The moonlight shifted across the glass. For just a moment, the reflection of the pipes looked like figures standing upright. A congregation, waiting. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. I walked away, but the hymn followed. Not with sound, with memory. Each note replaying itself inside me, bending backwards like a loop that never ends. Nights later, I passed again. The chapel windows were black. No dust, no movement, only the stillness of stone. But I heard it, soft, almost hidden in the rustle of leaves. One key, pressed down, a single note, waiting for the rest to follow. And I knew. Someday soon, the hymn would begin again, not inside the chapel. But inside me, the church was empty. Autumn had sunk into its bones. The stone walls kept the cold. I walked softly, every step echoing. Dust floated through the pale light that slipped between cracked, stained glass. The air tasted of iron and damp wood. At the far end of the nave, the baptismal font waited, carved from stone, smooth with age. Its basin still held water, but the water wasn't clear. It was black, murky, heavy, like something asleep. I leaned closer, expecting my reflection, but there was nothing. Only the water. Still. Breathing somehow. I touched the rim. Cold. The stone carried years of prayers I could almost hear. My fingers hovered over the surface. One drop slipped in. The ripples spread, but no reflection appeared. Only shifting shadows. Shapes beneath, not fish, not leaves. Something else. I couldn't tell how deep it went. The shadows moved like smoke underwater, curling, stretching, reaching. The silence around me grew heavier. No creak from the pews. No wind through the broken glass. Only the hum. Low, as if it was coming from the water itself. I bent closer. The shadows parted, then reformed. Almost like faces, I whispered my own name. It sank into the black. The ripples swallowed it. For a moment, I thought I saw myself. Not a reflection, but a figure beneath the surface. The outline of shoulders. A head turning upward. Eyes opening where no light should reach. I pulled back quickly. But the basin didn't move. The water stayed still. The silence cracked. A soft splash, like something brushing just under the surface. I stepped back. The air felt thick. The walls leaned closer. I told myself it was just water, old, stagnant, catching the shadows of glass. But I couldn't look away. The longer I stared, the more the basin seemed deeper. Not carved stone. Not contained. A well, a tunnel, a doorway, and inside it, movement. Slow, deliberate, as though waiting for me to kneel. The church groaned, beams shifting above. Dust sifted down in thin threads. But no draft touched me, only the chill from the font. It spread across the floor, up through my shoes. I thought of the children once held above this water. The candles lit, the prayers whispered, and I wondered, what exactly had been invited in? What had been left to sleep here? The shadows thickened, swallowing the faint light. For a heartbeat, the basin looked empty. Only dry stone, but then the black returned, and the hum with it. Quieter now. Like it knew I would leave. But not forever, because I had seen it. I stepped back slowly, my breath loud in the stillness. The pews watching me with their hollow rows. At the doorway, I turned once more. The water did not ripple. It waited. The shadows shifted again, just barely. Enough to remind me they were awake. Enough to promise I would dream of them. And in the pale silence of that autumn church, I knew the basin would never dry. It would always hold something, waiting beneath the surface. The church was colder than it should have been. Autumn winds pressed against the windows, but the air inside felt wrong. Still, I walked down the aisle, the old floorboards bending quietly beneath my steps. The altar stood ahead, bare. The cross that had always hung there, gone. Only empty nails remained, rust staining the pale wood like dried veins. I thought maybe someone had taken it for repair, or hidden it. But the priest was gone too, away for several days, leaving the small church in silence. At night, the building did not rest. The timbers groaned as though breathing, and faintly on the far wall, where the cross had once stretched high, there was still a shadow. Not faint, not soft, clear, as if the wooden cross had never left. I stood in the doorway, refusing to move closer. The lantern in my hand trembled, the flame bending toward the shape, pulled by a draft I could not feel. And in that shadow I thought I saw movement, like the cross swayed against a wind that wasn't there. The pews creaked behind me, but I had not moved, nor had anyone else. I told myself it was memory, my mind filling the absence with what should be there. But when the bell tower struck midnight, the lines of the shadow lengthened. It spread across the stones, reaching down, stretching like arms across the floor. I turned away. The wooden door resisted, swollen from the damp. When it opened, the night outside felt safer than the candlelit air inside. Still, I came back the next evening. Something about it called me. The missing cross, the shadow that refused to leave. The church smelled of wax and mildew. Dust floated like pale fog in the lantern glow. And yet again, on the wall, the shape waited. This time, I walked forward. Each pew leaned away, the wood bending slightly, like the seats themselves recoiled. My footsteps echoed, low and hollow, until I stood directly beneath the empty nails. The shadow loomed above me. Too dark, too sharp. Not cast by flame, nor by moonlight through glass. I reached out, fingers brushing the wall. Stone, cold. But the shape felt warm. I pulled back quickly, breath unsteady. The lantern hissed, its flame guttering. Then, with a sudden sigh, it went out. Darkness. And in that darkness, the shadow did not vanish. It glowed faintly, like something burning beneath the stone. I stumbled back. The pews groaned again, not empty this time. The faint outline of figures. Row by row, still as statues, headless, yet all facing the altar, all facing the cross that wasn't there. I shut my eyes, whispered a prayer I half remembered. But when I opened them again, the congregation had melted into the dark. Only the shadow remained. Thicker now, stretching longer, it reached down to my feet. Wrapped around them like water, cold, sinking. I tore myself free, stumbling back toward the door. The night outside was black, moon hidden, wind rushing. But even as I left the church, I saw it, through the stained glass. The wall inside still bore that impossible cross. I tried not to return, but on the third night I woke in my bed to see it. Not the wall, not the church, the shadow. Across my own room, tall, perfect, nailed into nothing. I did not sleep again. And when the priest finally returned, I asked him what had happened, why the cross had been taken. He only stared at me and whispered that no one had removed it. I went back with him. The altar stood as it always had. The wooden cross returned, heavy, weathered, unbroken, but on the wall, behind it, the shadow was still there, unmoving, separate, waiting. And sometimes, when the candles are low, it shifts ever so slightly, as if turning its head. The church was always cold at night, the kind of cold that seeps into your sleeves, that lingers in your chest. I was there longer than I should have been, sweeping dust from the altar, arranging hymn books no one touched anymore. When I finally stepped toward the entrance, the door was half open. Wind pressed through the crack, carrying the faint smell of rain. I pulled it shut. The hinges groaned. Wood pressed against the frame. It closed with a hollow click, but when I turned, it drifted open again, just a sliver. Just enough to see the tree line outside, swaying under a pale moon. I thought maybe the latch was broken. I tried again, closed it, pressed harder this time, waited, and still. It creaked open, a little wider, as if something on the other side had brushed it with a fingertip. I stood in the aisle watching it. The silence felt heavy, like the air inside the church had stopped breathing. Finally, I crossed back, shutting it once more, sliding the lock into place. Metal against wood, firm, secure. Yet when I turned, the faint scrape behind me told me it had opened again, the lock still hanging in place. But the door wasn't closed. I leaned closer. This time, no wind, no forest sounds, only a faint hum, low and steady. It didn't sound mechanical. It sounded alive. I closed it again, my hands trembling on the wood. I stayed there, pressing against it with my shoulder, my ear against the frame. The hum was louder, like something waiting on the other side, vibrating softly. When I stepped back, the door sighed open in one motion. Not a crack, not a sliver, but wide. And what should have been the night forest wasn't there. There was no path, no trees, no moonlight, just a stretch of black, endless black, shifting slightly as if it were breathing. And in that depth, the hum rolled like distant thunder. I froze. Every part of me wanted to close it. But the air pressing out of that void was warmer than the cold church. Almost inviting, I whispered to myself. Just a word to hear it in the silence. My own voice came back, distorted, like it had traveled through water. I staggered backward. The pews blurred in my vision. The hum pulsed. One long breath, then another. Slowly. The door began to close on its own, dragging across the floor, until the wood met the frame. And the church was sealed again. The latch never moved. The lock never turned, but when I placed my hand on the surface, it was warm, as if something had pressed against it from the other side. I left that night without sweeping the floor, without blowing out the candles, and now, each time I return, I find the door waiting, half open, as though the church is no longer mine to close, and sometimes, if I'm very still, I can hear the faint hum pressing through the crack, like it's calling my name. Slowly, patiently, waiting for me to step inside. The house at the end of the field was always quiet. Empty shutters, chipped paint, but each night, high above the ground, one window glowed with a faint orange light. A lantern, burning slowly, always the same, like a small eye staring out into the fields. I first noticed it in late autumn, the air colder, the grass stiff with frost, mist curling up from the ground, like breath from something asleep below the soil. At first, I thought it was someone squatting there, or maybe a farmer keeping watch. But the house was abandoned. Everyone said so. The door locked, the roof sagging, the floors too weak to hold weight. Yet the lantern glowed. Night after night, I told myself not to care, not to look at it anymore. But it was impossible. Some evenings, when the fog was heavy, the glow seemed brighter, closer, almost alive. I stood at my own window, watching it, wondering who climbed those stairs to light it each dusk. The strange part was how steady the flame burned, never flickering, even when the wind whipped across the fields. It looked patient, almost waiting. By December, I couldn't stop myself. I walked through the frost one night, crunching over brittle weeds, my breath white in the air. The house loomed above me, quiet and sagging. The lantern glowed faintly through the high window. And I felt it. A pull, like gravity, asking me to come closer. The door was harder to open than I expected. Its wood swollen, its hinges groaning softly. Inside smelled of dust and something wet. Like old stone, my footsteps echoed, but only half formed, muffled by the thick air. The silence wrapped tight around me. I told myself to leave, but my eyes kept climbing. Past the broken walls, up the shadowed staircase. The wood bent under me. Each step slow, trembling, but it held. Upwards, towards the glow, it was faint now, filtered through a narrow crack in the door at the landing. Orange light spilling just enough to touch the dust in the air. My hand shook as I pushed the door. It drifted open, and the lantern sat there, in the window burning. But the room was empty. No chair, no coat, no matches, no trace of anyone, just the lantern, its glass faintly clouded. Its flame still and soft, I walked closer, the floor cold through my shoes, boards sighing, my breath uneven. The lantern hummed faintly. That's what it felt like, and not sound, but vibration. Deep in my chest, I touched it. The metal frame was warm, too warm as if freshly lit. I pulled my hand back, glanced behind me. The room was silent, still, hollow. No one had been there. No one could be there, and yet the lantern glowed on, steady and waiting, as if I had only interrupted something. I stayed longer than I should have, watching the flame, trying to understand. The more I looked, the more it seemed wrong. Too clean, no wick, No oil, just light, suspended in glass. Alive. The air thickened around me. Breath harder, heavier, shadows shifting across the walls, though nothing moved. I stepped back. But the lantern brightened. A pale hum against my skin. The window behind it reflected my face, but blurred. Like the glass wasn't showing me, but something close. I turned. The door still open. The hallway waiting, silent. I left then, slowly, careful with each step down. The glow behind me steady, unbothered. Outside, the field was black with frost. I breathed the cold air deeply, relieved, but still listening. When I turned back, the lantern still burned in the high window, as if nothing had changed. But I knew I had touched it. And it had been warm, and now, every night since, when I pass that empty house, the lantern glows a little brighter, almost like it knows me. The floor was cold. Even through the thin rug, I could feel it seeping into me. The night had been quiet, until I noticed the scraps, small pieces, brittle, curled at the edges like burned leaves. They were scattered across the wooden floorboards as if someone had dropped them. Long ago, I bent closer. The texture reminded me of old skin, so dry it seemed ready to crumble beneath my breath. Each scrap carried faded lines, not ink, something darker, almost absorbed into the fibers. The marks curved and hooked. Not quite letters, not quite shapes. I touched one. It stuck faintly to my finger, like the static of paper against skin. I pulled back, and the scrap fluttered, almost sighing against the floor. The silence in the room deepened. Like the air was waiting, I began arranging them, piece by piece. Edges met with a strange precision, as though they had always longed to be whole again. The scattered fragments clicked together, until something began to emerge, a prayer. Or something that looked like one. Lines forming rows, strange breaks, symbols like hooks and spirals repeating, as if insisting to be read. I felt it then, the soft hum of the air pressing close to my skin, as though the walls were leaning in, listening. I shouldn't have spoken it. But the syllables drew themselves out of me. They rose, trembling from my throat, like I'd always known them. The first word tasted of rust. The second left a cold film on my tongue. By the third, my breath came out pale, white, even though the room was warm. The hum grew louder, not outside, inside, as if the air itself had begun to vibrate. Every breath heavy, every step of silence heavier still. I tried to stop, but the prayer pushed through my lips. A language that wasn't mine, a rhythm older than the walls, older than the floorboards. It felt alive. When the last word left me, the scraps lifted. Not by wind, not by touch. They floated, trembling, as if held by unseen fingers. My hair prickled. The air thickened, pressing down on my shoulders, filling my chest. Every corner of the room seemed darker except the pale shimmer of the parchment in the air. I wanted to breathe, but the air was no longer air. It was weight. It was presence. A shadow pooled at the ceiling, though no light should have cast it. It spread along the plaster in slow, curling shapes, like smoke without fire. And I realized it was listening. The parchment fell, flat against the floor, but the prayer remained, humming inside the silence. I could feel it pressing against my ribs, threading itself into the rhythm of my pulse. The room was colder now, not the kind of cold that fades with blankets or heat. It was bone deep. It whispered against my teeth when I closed my mouth. I backed away, every step soft, every movement echoed, though the house had never carried sound before. It was as though something was repeating me. A half-second later, the parchment no longer looked like paper. It glistened faintly as though damp. The words pulsed, faint and uneven, like veins, alive. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept returning to it, drawn back over and over, like a tide I couldn't resist. Somewhere, inside the hum, a breath exhaled. Not mine, not anyone's I could name, but it brushed across my ear, slow and cold, as though leaning close to listen back. I don't remember how long I stood there, or when I finally stepped out of the room, but even now, if I stay still enough, I can hear it. That strange prayer, threaded between my breaths, waiting for me to speak it again, and I know, if I do, the room will not be empty this time. The air was damp that night, Cold enough to sting when I breathed in, I had taken shelter inside the old church. Its doors had been left unlocked, though no one ever came here anymore. The woods smelled of rain, of mildew, of something that had been sealed too long. I remember the silence, how it pressed against me, how it made me careful. Even with the sound of my own footsteps, I closed the heavy door behind me. It groaned in protest, as if it hadn't been moved in years. And then I saw it, through the cracked window at the front of the church. Just past the warped glass, a pale shape stood in the fog. At first I thought it was just a tree, bent and crooked in the distance. But it wasn't. The longer I stared, the clearer the outline became. A person, still, unmoving, facing the church. I blinked, and it shifted. Not closer, not farther. Just different. Its arms were down, and then they weren't. Its head tilted when I looked again. The fog clung so thick around it. The shape blurred and reformed every time my eyes broke contact. I pressed my back against the pew. The air in the church felt heavy, like it was waiting. I tried to tell myself it was only the mist, that the fog plays tricks, that I was alone. But when I looked again, the figure had moved, now standing by the low stone wall, closer, watching. The faint outline of its shoulders, the pale suggestion of a face. I turned away, closed my eyes, waited. When I opened them, it had shifted again, now near the path that led to the church steps. Not walking, not drifting, just there. Each time I blinked, it redrew itself. I held my breath, afraid even that small sound would carry through the fog. The church was dark. The candles had long since burned to stubs. The altar draped in a cloth damp with age. I told myself I would wait until dawn, that the light would clear it, that nothing stays in the fog forever. But the figure did not fade. Every time I lifted my eyes, it was closer, just outside the door. Its form blurred, as if the fog wanted to keep it hidden. Or maybe protect me from seeing it clearly. I whispered into the silence. Please go. The fog pressed tighter against the glass, thicker, breathing. I turned toward the heavy wooden door. I swear I felt something lean against it from the other side. No knock, no push, just the weight of presence. I sat in the pew, hands trembling against the wood. The air smelled of damp stone, of candle wax long melted. I blinked again, and this time the figure was no longer outside. It stood at the far end of the aisle, inside the church, motionless in the pale light slipping through the cracks. I could not see its face. The fog had followed it in, curling around its frame, curling around me. My chest tightened, each breath shallow, each blink pulling it nearer. I wanted to move, to run, but my body refused. The silence was so complete that I could hear the faint hum of my own blood, the faint rustle of my sleeve against the pew. I closed my eyes one last time, praying it would vanish when I looked again. But when I opened them, the aisle was empty. The fog was gone. Only the silence remained. And yet I still felt it, standing just beyond the edges of my sight, patient, unmoving, waiting for me to blink again. It was winter. The church was colder than it should have been. Even with the furnace groaning through the pipes, the air never felt warm. At night, the silence stretched too far. And yet, it wasn't silence at all. The first night, I heard it faintly. A low, dragging sound, slow, weighted, as if something heavy was being pulled across stone. I thought it was the furnace, old pipes settling, the kind of noises every empty building makes. But the sound wasn't in the walls. It wasn't above either. It came from beneath the floor. The boards shivered with each pull, like breath drawn through old wood. I told myself I was imagining it. But the next night it returned, louder, more deliberate. I pressed my ear against the wooden planks of the aisle. The dragging was clearer there. It moved slowly, stopping, then starting again, as though something below was circling, tracing the shape of the pews. The church had a basement. But I knew that space. Small, brick-lined, nothing beneath the floor but soil, no room for movement. And yet the sound traveled, dragging, pausing, dragging again. I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow in my mouth, like someone else's breath, borrowed. On the third night, I lit a candle. The shadows stretched long across the pews. I waited. It didn't take long. The dragging began again. Closer now, directly beneath the altar. The boards trembled faintly. I gripped the edges of the pew until my knuckles ached. The candle flame quivered, though no wind touched it. I wanted to run, but my feet stayed rooted, my chest rising too shallow. As though the church itself held me there, the dragging grew harsher. As though nails scraped through the soil, a faint rhythm beneath it, almost like breath, and then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't ease you, the kind that waits. I stayed awake until morning. The boards beneath the altar still seemed to hold their breath. By the fourth night, I thought I was losing myself. But when I arrived, I saw the floor. The wood was changing, a small bulge near the altar boards, curved upward like something pressing from below. I touched it. The wood was warm. That night, the dragging returned louder, no longer muffled by soil. The boards quaked under its weight. The bulge grew wider. I whispered out loud, "Stop." And for a moment it did. Everything still. Even my own heartbeat seemed to pause. But then it resumed. Faster now, like impatience. The bulge in the floor split slightly at the seam. Dust fell between the cracks. I backed away, holding the candle in front of me. The wax dripped, pooling on the stone tiles. I wanted to scream, but my throat was a locked door. I thought of leaving the church for good. But it wasn't that simple. This was the only place left to me. And some part of me knew. If I left, whatever was beneath would follow. By the fifth night, the floor had risen in two places. Long, curved arcs of wood bending up, as if ribs were pushing from underneath. I didn't go near them. I sat in the last pew, candle extinguished, watching the pale light of the moon spill through the stained glass. The dragging began again. But this time, I heard something else. A voice, not words, not fully formed. Just a low, wet murmur, coming from beneath the boards. It rose and fell with the dragging, like prayer spoken through water. I pressed my palms over my ears. But the voice stayed. Not outside, inside. Behind my ribs. I wanted to believe I still had a choice. That I could turn away, walk out, never return. But the truth weighed heavier than the dragging sound. I understood now. It wasn't rising to meet me. I had been sinking toward it. Each night, a little more, and tonight, the boards were thin. I looked at the bulging wood near the altar. The faint crack, something pale pushed at the seam, just enough to catch the light. I couldn't tell if it was bone, or skin, or something older, something that never should have been buried. The church was quiet again, but the silence was no comfort. I lay down on the pew, listening, waiting. The board shifted once more. A final patient drag, and I thought, perhaps it isn't the floor that will open. Perhaps it's me. The church was always quiet in autumn. Its windows clouded, its wood swollen from the damp air. I only went inside during the day, but one evening I stayed longer. The light was already thinning, turning amber. The pews stretched out like ribs in a hollow chest. On the pulpit, I noticed something I hadn't before. A book, leather-bound. Its cover worn smooth as if touched by trembling hands again and again. I opened it carefully. The first page bore a name. The priest who had served here until his sudden disappearance. The ink was faded. But the words were steady, written with the patience of ritual. It began like any sermon, gentle, deliberate, hopeful. He wrote of his flock. The voices that had dwindled each week. The silence that replaced them. Then his tone shifted. He mentioned shadows near the altar, whispers echoing when the church was empty. Each entry grew shorter. He complained of a low hum, something that would not stop even when the bells were still. I turned another page. The writing had become hurried, lines bent, words pressed deep into the paper. He warned not to linger after dark, not to trust the silence that followed the prayers, not to look toward the stained glass when the moon was high. I paused. The air inside the church felt heavier, like dust hanging in a throat that refuses to clear. I read on. He spoke of footsteps in the loft above the pulpit, of hymns sung by a voice that wasn't his. He wrote of candles relighting themselves, of pages in his own Bible being torn, though he swore he was alone, of breathing, steady and close, just behind his shoulder. The warnings grew desperate. He begged for anyone who found the journal to leave before nightfall, to close the door and never look back. My eyes caught on the final page. The ink was darker. The hand that wrote it had pressed so deep the paper split. "Do not stand at the pulpit after—" The sentence ended there. The pen mark dragged off the page, a streak of black frozen in a moment of interruption. I listened. The rafters above moaned softly. Something shifted behind the curtains near the altar. The journal trembled in my hands. Though no draft moved across the room, the silence seemed alive, waiting. I closed the book. The clasp clicked shut with a sound that felt too sharp, too final. The pale light through the windows had thinned to nothing. The church breathed in darkness. I stood very still. The journal was still warm, as if it remembered the last hand that touched it, as if it had been waiting for mine, and in that hollow quiet, I could almost hear the sentence continue, whispered, unfinished, behind me. A warning meant for someone else, or for me. I left it on the pulpit. Its weight belonged there. Its silence belonged here. The door closed behind me without a sound, and the night pressed in against the glass. I kept walking, but part of me still feels the pause of that last page, the words that never finished, and I wonder if the journal is still waiting to. The church was always colder than the air outside. Even in summer, stone walls held the chill, and the silence, always heavier inside than out. Dust floated where the light slipped through cracked stained glass. Pale reds, faded blues. They never reached the far corners. That was where the bell rope hung, thick, frayed, a column of shadow against stone. It shouldn't have moved, but it did, swaying in the stillness. No draft touched my skin. No door had opened. The air was unmoving, yet the rope shifted, back and forth, slow, like something pulling, like breath through lungs. I stopped halfway down the aisle. My shoes scraped the flagstone, and the motion paused. The rope hung straight, still, as though it had been watching me. I told myself it was nothing, just weight settling, fibers tightening, but then I noticed the bottom, the knot. It was damp, darkened, as if touched by hands not long ago. When I drew closer, I smelled it. Not dust, not stone, but warmth. The faint sweetness of skin. I reached out, fingertips brushing rough hemp, and froze. It wasn't cold. It wasn't rope. It was warm. Warm like flesh, like the inside of a wrist. I snatched my hand back. The sway returned. Not wild, not violent, just steady, measured, as though someone, somewhere above, was tugging with care. But the bell tower was empty. I had checked the stairs. They were blocked years ago. Rotting steps, crumbling beams. No one could climb. Yet the rope moved, and with each sway, the silence deepened. No birds in the rafters, no echo of my breath. Only the steady rhythm. Back, forth. I whispered to myself that it was in my head, that my mind made shapes where there were none, but I couldn't stop watching. The fibers seemed to pulse, a subtle beat, like blood beneath skin. I pressed my palm against it. This time I held it there, and I felt it, a throb, a faint heartbeat, not mine. I stumbled back, my shoulder striking the pew. The creak carried through the hall, and the rope went still. But my hand, it burned, not like heat, but like memory, as though I'd touched something that remembered me. I glanced toward the tower, dark stone above, shadows gathering in the beams. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a pale outline, almost human. Hands, gripping the invisible end of the rope high above. Then gone. The stillness returned. But I couldn't breathe deeply anymore. Each inhale caught, shallow, tangled with the thought that the rope was waiting for me. I sat in the last pew. The air was close, thick, and I listened. Minutes passed, maybe hours. And then, the rope moved again. Not a sway, but a sudden jerk, sharp enough to lift dust from the flagstones. No sound from the bell. It hadn't rung in decades. The clapper had long been removed. But still, it pulled. And I realized something. The motion wasn't trying to lift. It was trying to drag, downward, toward the floor. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I left the church with the echo of my own footsteps chasing me, through the crooked door, into the pale daylight. But the feeling clung. When I closed my eyes that night, I still felt it against my palm. That warmth, that steady throb, and in the quiet, I swore I heard it. Not the bell, not the church, but the soft scrape of rope, moving slowly against stone. Even when I was far away, even when no one else could hear. It was late in October. The nights had turned sharp, and the house had grown colder than I remembered. There was a draft I couldn't trace. It seemed to curl up from the floorboards. And sometimes, in the stillness, I thought I heard something. A low hum. Not mechanical. More like breathing. I followed it one evening, bare feet against the wooden planks, each step careful, though the house itself seemed to lean forward with me. Near the back hallway, the air grew heavier, and that was where I noticed it. A square outline set into the floor, the trap door. I'd walked past it for months, dust gathering in the grooves, a ring of cold air slipping through. But tonight, I couldn't ignore it. My hand shook as I lifted the latch. The hinges let out a groan, like something waking up after a long silence, and the smell hit me first. Damp. Old earth. A breath of stone and mildew rising from below. I held my breath and leaned over. The dark beneath was absolute. No shapes, no stairs, no end. Only the sense of depth. I should have closed it. I should have walked away. But instead, I crouched lower, waiting. For what? I didn't know. And then, it happened. A flicker, a pale point of light, deep in the blackness. Blinking once, I froze. It wasn't steady, like a candle. It pulsed, faint, then gone. Then it returned. A single glimmer, cold, unblinking. I told myself it was a trick. Moisture catching the moonlight. Something harmless. But then there were two, side by side, low to the ground, both fixed on me. My mouth went dry. The air seemed to press upward, filling my chest with weight. And I realized I was kneeling there, exposed. I tried to blink, to clear my eyes. But the glimmers didn't waver. They grew sharper, defined, like pupils narrowing. And then, a third appeared, higher than the rest, hovering just above. All three locked on my face. I couldn't move, not even to close the trapdoor. Every part of me understood what that meant. The basement was not empty. The silence stretched, thicker than the dark. And in that silence, I thought I heard a shift, the faint scrape of something against stone. The eyes did not blink again. They only waited, as though my hesitation was what they wanted. I leaned back slowly, every muscle trembling. My hand reached for the wooden edge of the trap door, but just as my fingers brushed it, the eyes moved. Not forward, not back, but wider, spreading apart, drifting into the blackness one by one until only the middle eye remained, suspended, patient. I lowered the door in silence. The latch clicked shut, and for a long moment I sat there on the cold floor, listening. There was no breath, no hum, only the echo of my own pulse in my ears. I thought I was safe. But as I turned away, I noticed something. In the crack between the wood and the frame, a faint glow, not fading, not gone, just waiting beneath the floorboards. The frost was still clinging to the grass that morning. Pale light slid across the stones. The graveyard was hushed, the air heavy, waiting. I walked the same narrow path I always did, past the iron gate, past the leaning markers, their names worn soft with time. And there it was, the angel. She had always stood in the same place, at the far corner where the graveyard touched the forest. Her head bowed, her gaze fixed into the trees. No one remembered who she was carved for. No one alive, at least. But she was older than the church, older than the paths I walked every morning. I knew her face well. Wings folded back, eyes closed, her mouth always set in silence. But that morning, I stopped. The angel was no longer facing the forest. Her body shifted. Her chin tilted toward the church, and her lips curved. A faint, unshakable smile. The air tightened in my chest. I looked for signs, any marks in the frost. No footprints, no drag lines across the soil, just her turned. I whispered to myself that it was only my memory, that perhaps she had always been this way. But I knew. Every detail lived inside me, and she had never smiled before. I couldn't stay long. I forced myself to move. The chapel bell was quiet that morning, though it should have been ringing. The silence pressed against my ears like cotton. Later that day, I asked the caretaker. He looked puzzled, as if I had spoken nonsense. "She's always faced the church," he said. "Hasn't she?" But his words cracked at the edges. He didn't look at me when he said it. That night, the fog rolled in thick from the forest. I left my window open a little, and I swear I heard gravel shift, like footsteps moving slow across the graveyard path. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I went back. The angel hadn't moved again, still facing the church. Still smiling. Her expression had deepened, though. The corners of her mouth stretched wider. Not joy, but something hollow, knowing. My hands shook as I brushed the frost from her base. The name etched there had always been unreadable. Worn stone, crumbled letters, but beneath the moss there was fresh carving. Clean cuts, sharper than the rest. A single word, waiting. I stumbled back. The silence of the graveyard pressed in again, thicker than ever. Even the birds refused to sing. I left quickly that time, but all day, her face followed me, the memory of that smile, the word carved beneath her feet. By evening, I swore I could feel her gaze on my back, even inside my own home. Even with the shutters closed, the angel had always watched the forest. Now she watched the church. And when I closed my eyes, I wondered if she was watching me too. The next morning, frost still clung to the grass, but I couldn't bring myself to walk the path. I stayed inside, listened to the quiet, waited for whatever she was waiting for. And even now, I can feel her smile in the dark, lingering, as if the stone had learned how to breathe. The chapel was empty. Its windows were tall, dust-clouded. The morning light slipped through in broken shards. The benches smelled of old wood. And rain trapped in stone. I walked slowly, each step hollow, my breath carrying further than it should have. On the altar, an old hymnal waited. Its spine cracked, its cover darkened with age. The pages inside were blank, every single one, like it had been scrubbed of memory. I touched the corner. The paper felt colder than my hand. A strange, soft dampness clung to it. I should have left. But the silence held me. There was something waiting in it. The light shifted, a cloud passing overhead, and when I looked down again, faint ink had begun to appear. It crawled from nowhere. thin, trembling lines, forming letters I didn't recognize at first. I leaned closer. The letters bent backwards, words, written in reverse, not printed, not drawn, but handwritten, jagged, uneven, as though someone invisible sat across from me. Pressing a pen against the page, one stroke at a time, I listened. The hush of the chapel seemed thicker. Like a breath being held, the writing spread. Line after line, each word darker than the last, and though they were backwards, I could still understand them. They were prayers, familiar phrases, but twisted by their reflection. Deliver us, or from silence. Bind our voices. Never let them rise. I felt a weight settle in my chest, like the words themselves pressed against my lungs. I turned the page, hoping to stop it. But the next sheet was filling too. Again, backwards letters. Again, desperate prayers. This time, the ink bled. It spread into the paper fibers, leaving behind shadows of words even when I blinked. My hands shook. I closed the book. But the cover hummed under my palm. Not sound, but vibration, as though the pages inside were alive. I set it down, stepped back. Yet I could still feel it, writing in the dark, unseen. I thought I heard something then. A rustling, like robes brushing the aisle. But when I looked, the chapel was empty, still hollow, pale with dust. I tried to breathe, but every exhale seemed louder. Every inhale, caught too short. I opened the book again. The ink was racing now, no longer slow but urgent. The letters scratched themselves into the page. Backwards, faster than my eyes could follow. An invisible hand, frantic, desperate. The words filled the margins, the spaces between lines, then wrapped themselves into circles, spirals, curls. Not prayers anymore. Something else. Something written only to be whispered to stone. I blinked and saw movement. The ink lifted. It glistened wet, but rose like smoke. Tiny threads of black twisting above the page. They didn't drift away. They formed shapes, a figure standing over the hymnal. Faceless, made entirely of crawling script. The chapel grew colder. My breath misted before me, but the figure leaned closer. It had no mouth. Yet the air thickened with words. Backwards whispers. I couldn't move. The letters spiraled, their shapes sliding against the walls, the benches, the ceiling beams, until the whole chapel seemed written on, layered in black. Sentences moving under the surface, alive. I blinked again, and the figure was gone. The ink lay flat, only on the hymnal now, still, but the words remained. Every page filled to the edges, every line backwards, and the final sentence, the one written larger than the rest, I could read without effort, even reversed. It said, "Do not let them sing." I closed the book, my hands shaking. The pale light returned to the windows. The chapel was empty again, completely still, but the hush felt unnatural. I set the hymnal back on the altar, slowly stepped away, not daring to breathe too loud, because in that silence, I knew the writing hadn't stopped. I had only closed the cover, and somewhere in the dark between its pages, the ink was still moving, still writing, waiting for the moment someone else opened it. The tower was old, stone walls that kept the cold pressed close to my skin. The spiral stairs wound upward like a coiled shadow. Every night I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate pacing above me. The tower room had been locked since I arrived, the iron latch stiff, swollen with rust. No one had the key. At first, I thought it was the wind. The old stones creaked, the timbers shifted. But then the rhythm came. One step, a pause. Another step. The kind of weight that only a person could make. I tried to ignore it. I closed my door at night, stuffed cloth into the crack beneath. But the footsteps always returned. Always above me. Walking the circle of that hidden room, the caretaker never spoke of it. When I asked, his pale eyes slipped away. He only said, "The tower has been sealed for years." Yet the pacing never stopped. I would lie awake, listening, the steps circling, sometimes halting as if they knew I was awake, then starting again, the sound brushing against the edge of my breath. Nights grew longer. The silence in the rest of the house felt heavier. Even the birds avoided the eaves of the tower. Their wings scattered, never settling near the roof. One evening, the lock cracked. Not with my hands, not with any key, but on its own, I heard it from below. The sharp snap of metal surrendering after decades. The sound rolled down the spiral stairs like a whisper carried by stone. I waited. The pacing did not begin that night. For the first time, there was silence. The stillness was worse. My chest rose and fell, but the air tasted thin, as if something had been waiting. And now it was free. I climbed the stairs slowly. Each step echoed hollow against the stone. The air grew colder, pressed tight around me. A faint draft curled down from the broken door when I reached it. The wood leaned open. The lock split, dangling useless. Inside was only darkness. I pushed gently. The door swung wider, the hinges groaning. The room was empty. Round walls, bare stone. Dust lay untouched across the floor. But in the center, a chair. Old wood, narrow-backed. It shifted, faintly rocking. Forward, back, forward again. No hand touched it. No breeze stirred. I stood there, watching its slow rhythm. The wood tapping softly against the floor. As if the pacing had never left, only changed shape. I stepped closer. The air thickened, pressing against my skin. The rocking slowed, then stopped. Silence filled the tower. So heavy I could hear the blood moving in my ears. So deep I almost forgot how to breathe. I backed away, closing the door without a sound. The broken lock dangled, useless against the wood. I thought the steps would return that night. They didn't. The tower was quiet. Too quiet. As if the footsteps had finally found another place to walk. Some nights I still wake suddenly, certain I've heard them. The rhythm of weight circling above me. But when I listen, there is nothing. Only the silence, pressing in from the tower room. And the memory of that chair, still rocking, with no one there. The church had been abandoned for decades. That's what they told me, at least. The doors sagged on their hinges, swollen with damp air. The bell tower leaned as if the weight of silence had bent its spine. I stepped inside anyway. The air was colder there, thin like something had been drained from it long ago. Dust floated in the pale light slanting through broken panes. The pews were cracked, warped, some collapsed into heaps of splinters. The altar cloth had rotted into threads, and still, it felt as though someone was waiting. I moved carefully, my footsteps muffled by layers of dirt. A rustling came from the rafters. Birds, maybe, nesting in the beams. Their wings stirred the silence like ripples across water. I don't know why I walked toward the far corner. Something pulled at me. Not sound, not sight. More like the hum you feel in your chest when a storm is near. That's when I saw it. Half buried in dust, pressed flat against the warped floorboards. A photograph. I knelt down, brushing it with the back of my hand. My fingertips came away gray. The picture was old, its edges curled, the surface scabbed with mold. Still, I could see the image. The church. This church, but not ruined, not empty. The windows shone with golden light, spilling across the stone like fire at dusk. Inside, the pews were full. Rows of people sat in shadowed stillness, their faces blurred, heads bowed. My throat tightened. I lifted the photograph closer. The details sharpened. The glow through the windows seemed too bright, too alive. I thought I saw it flicker, as though the picture itself was breathing. The people in the pews, yes, they were clearer now. Lines of shoulders, pale ovals of faces. None of them were looking forward. Their heads, every one of them, tilted slightly to the side. Toward me, I lowered the photograph. The church around me was still cold, empty, silent. But when I looked again at the picture, the pews weren't still, a blur at the edge of the frame, a figure standing near the altar, not blurred, not faint. Watching, I blinked hard. My chest was trembling with each breath. When I looked again, the figure had moved closer. The second pew. My pulse slipped into my throat. I wanted to drop the photograph. I wanted to crush it under my heel and leave, but my hands wouldn't let go. The dust around me shifted. I heard the faintest creak, like an old board bending beneath a step. I stared down. The photograph had changed again. Rows of faces were clearer now. Empty eyes, mouths not quite closed. Their necks bent at impossible angles, their gaze tilted, always toward me. The figure had stepped closer still. Fourth pew. I could almost hear breath in the silence. My own, or not my own. I tried to steady my hand, but the photograph shook. I forced my eyes to the windows in the image. The golden light wasn't light anymore. It was fire. The glass seemed to burn from within, flames trapped, unable to escape. And the people, still unmoving, still staring. The figure had reached the aisle. I dropped the photograph. It landed face down in the dust. I stepped back, my boots scraping over the warped wood. The silence swelled, pressing against my ears thick as fog. Nothing moved. Only the empty church, the broken pews, the shadows. And yet, my breath wasn't the only one in that room. I didn't pick up the photograph again. I only remember the strange warmth rising from the floorboards, as though the fire in the picture was waiting to spread. The evening was pale, almost fragile, the kind of light that felt like it could shatter if touched. I walked slowly along the cracked stone path that led to the old church, its walls hunched under ivy like tired shoulders. A fog had begun to seep through the trees curling around the iron gate, soft and hesitant, almost alive. I paused at the gate. The hinges groaned under some forgotten weight, and I thought I heard a rustling behind the shrubs. The air smelled damp, like soil and smoke, and my breath left faint clouds in the chill. I thought I was alone. Then I heard it. My name. Soft. Faint. Almost as if the wind itself was shaping the syllables. I froze, the chill crawling higher along my neck. It came again. Closer now. Clearer. My name whispered through the bars. I turned. The churchyard was empty. No one crouched behind the gravestones. No shadow moved among the twisted trees. Only silence. The fog thickened. It wrapped around the gate, pressing against me like a question I couldn't answer. I stepped closer, hand brushing the cold metal. The whisper came again. Not my name this time. Something else. Something I didn't recognize. It was shaped like words, but they felt wrong in my mouth, heavy in my mind. I wanted to step back, but something inside me leaned forward. I could see the church now. Its windows were dim, the pale light inside flickering as if uncertain. No doors opened. No footsteps echoed. Only the soft hum of something unseen. I waited. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in the fog. A crow landed on the gravestone nearest to me, still as stone. Its beady eyes reflected the faint light. I felt its gaze burn through me, and then it cawed once. So loud against the hush of the evening that I jumped. The whisper returned. Closer now. Right beside me. I turned, expecting someone, anyone, but the space was empty. Just the fog curling at my boots, swirling in the dim light, carrying that strange, soft intonation. I pressed my hands against the gate. Cold, hard, real. The ivy tickled my fingers, wet and soft. I wanted to pull away, but the sound held me, suspended, like I was caught between breathing and letting go. A shadow flickered inside the church window. Not long, not full, just enough to make the fog feel thicker, heavier around me. I held my breath. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but the whisper. It had changed again, no name. No words I could understand. Just a vibration, soft and deliberate, threading through the air, sliding across my skin. I thought of turning away. Walking home, the warmth of my kitchen. But my feet felt rooted. The gate didn't feel like a barrier anymore. I heard soft footsteps behind me. Then nothing. I dared to look over my shoulder. Nothing moved. The fog swallowed the path. I was alone. A wind gusted through the trees, bringing a faint rustling, almost like voices shifting between leaves. The crow had gone. Only the fog remained, curling, whispering. I leaned against the gate, listening, waiting. The hum of the unseen pressed closer, resonating in my chest. I thought I felt fingers brush my shoulder, cold, feather-light, disappearing before I could even register. The church bell tolled somewhere deep inside, though I hadn't seen the rope move. It sounded hollow, distant, like it was reaching through another place entirely. The whisper softened, almost affectionate, curling around my ears, shaping the silence itself. I blinked. The shadow in the window lingered, though dimmer now, like it couldn't decide whether to exist. The air felt heavier, thicker, like a presence settling just beyond perception. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't obey. I stepped closer to the gate, fingers grazing the iron. The whisper, now gone, left a silence that screamed louder than any sound. I could almost hear the walls breathing. The stones remembering, a single leaf fell from the ivy drifting between us. I reached for it, then let it float past, carried by the unseen hand of the fog. The church seemed to exhale. I walked away slowly, not turning my back, not looking for answers. The fog wrapped around me like a question I didn't need to answer tonight. And my name lingered in the silence long after I stepped into the path of the moon. The attic was colder than the rest of the house. A pale light crept in through the small round window. Dust floated lazily in the narrow beams. I had always avoided this room. Too many shadows lingered in corners I couldn't name. Even in daylight it felt wrong. At first I thought it was the wind, a soft scraping high above near the rafters. I imagined the loose boards shifting, but the sound came night after night. Always above, always watching. I stopped looking up, stopped listening. One evening, I stayed in the room longer than usual. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and something sweeter, sour almost. The shadows seemed to gather, curling in corners like smoke. I froze as I heard a faint, not from the house, not the pipes. It was deliberate, small, like a thread of sound tugging at the edges of my mind. Eyes. I knew it was eyes. Two faint glimmers in the rafters. Not like lights, not like reflections. Alive. Watching. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The hum rose almost imperceptibly until it pressed against my chest. Days passed. I didn't speak of it. Even now, writing this, my hands shake with the memory. I would catch glimpses in mirrors, shadows bending oddly, as if peering around me. The movement was subtle at first. A shift here, a rustle there. But the eyes never blinked. Never looked away. I tried to convince myself it was sleep, imagination, a trick of light. But then last night I heard it descending. Not falling, not jumping, moving with purpose, deliberate, careful. I watched from the stairs. Its silhouette was pale, unnervingly thin. The rafters no longer held it. It paused mid-step, as if tasting the air, listening. The hum had softened to a whisper only I could hear. I wanted to call out. I wanted to run, but my voice and legs refused to obey. The shadows in the room stretched toward it. They bent and swayed, alive under the flickering light. Every instinct screamed to hide. It moved closer, closer to the center of the attic, to where I had left a chair, a small lamp. The glimmer of its eyes caught the dim bulb, making them pulse faintly. Time slowed. Every creak of floorboards echoed too loud. Every breath I took was swallowed by the stillness around me. It stopped. Just above the floor now, its presence pressing against the edges of the room. I couldn't look away, couldn't blink. Then it tilted its head. Curiosity, hunger, amusement. I couldn't tell. Something primal clicked in me, a fear I had never known. I felt it in the air, not behind me, not beside me, but inside me. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through my chest. I wanted to leave, but my feet were cemented to the spot. The hum returned, low and rhythmic, as if counting my heartbeat. I could feel it moving again. Soft footsteps, or maybe nothing at all. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. I dared to glance at the lamp. It flickered once, twice, and then went pale. The eyes in the rafters gleamed faintly one last time. I don't know when it left, or if it ever truly left. The rafters are empty, but the feeling lingers. Every night I sense it. High above, watching, waiting, and sometimes, in the corner of a room, it feels like it's already here. The air chills without reason. A shadow lingers where there should be none. And I whisper my own prayers into the silence, hoping it doesn't answer. The church was empty. Moonlight spilled through the stained glass, painting the stone floor in muted reds and blues. Every pew lay still, cold. I had been walking these aisles for hours. Or was it longer? Time felt fractured, like the shadows themselves measured it. The air hung heavy, dust motes drifting slowly, almost deliberately. I reached the front door. Its wood was old, splintered in places, yet polished from years of touch. I pushed, thinking it would open easily. It didn't. A faint groan rose from the hinges. The door shivered but didn't budge. Then it slammed. I stepped back, heart thudding. The echo rolled through the nave. Alone, yes, but the silence that followed. It was almost solid, pressing against my chest. I moved along the aisle, footsteps soft, cautious. Each one seemed louder than the last, as if the church itself was listening. The altar was in shadow. I could just make out the shape of the cross, its edges sharp in the pale light, yet impossibly distant. I leaned closer. A cold draft whispered across my neck. No wind should reach this deep inside. I tried the door again. Still locked. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. I turned. A flicker in the corner of my eye. The pews. They shifted. Not all at once, just one. Softly, just enough to make me question. I sat. Just to steady myself, the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It had weight. It had patience. It waited. Minutes stretched like hours. The moon shifted. The colors on the floor bled into gray. I swallowed. The taste of dust and fear, metallic and sharp. A thud. Behind me? Ahead? I couldn't tell. I walked toward it. The pulpit. The lectern. Something was etched there. Not on paper, on the wood itself. Faint lines, almost invisible. Symbols? Letters? I could not decipher. I traced them with my fingertips. A chill seeped through my hand. I withdrew quickly. The door shivered again. This time, not a slam, but a creak. Slow, deliberate, like a sigh or a warning. I stepped back, heart hammering. I tried to speak. Words failed. Even my own voice felt foreign in the airless space. I wandered the nave. Every step made the silence heavier. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, watching. Sometimes I swore I saw the floor ripple like water moving beneath stone. I stopped. Breath shallow. The faintest shift in the corner, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It didn't move like a person. Not human, it simply existed there. I blinked. It remained. Then it receded. Or I moved past it. I could not tell which. I returned to the door, hoping, wishing it was still closed. The lock held, stubborn and absolute. I sank to the floor. The stone was cold, unforgiving. I hugged my knees. The silence grew around me, wrapping like a cloak. Heavy, suffocating, and then a sound, not wind, not the building settling. Breathing, slow, measured, not mine. I froze. It came again, soft, behind me, beside me, somewhere close and yet impossibly distant. I dared not move, dared not look, dared not even think. The church seemed to lean inward, walls bending slightly, pressing closer. The shadows quivered. The colors on the floor faded. I felt it before I saw it. Presence. Watching. Waiting. It was patient. It was eternal. And it was here. In this stillness with me. I thought about running. The door was locked. The windows, high and barred by iron. No escape. I remembered the air I'd felt earlier. The cold whisper against my neck. It was not wind. It had intent. It had awareness. I closed my eyes. Let the darkness settle over me. Let the silence press against my ears. Even the breathing. Even that subtle, patient rhythm. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. I could not measure it. I could only feel it. The stillness, the weight, the inevitability of being here. Eventually, I stopped struggling. Acceptance came quietly, like a shadow sliding into place. The door remained shut. The church remained empty. And the breathing continued. I breathed with it, slowly, deliberately, matching the rhythm, finding a strange, fragile balance. The moon shifted again, casting pale light through the stained glass. The colors softened. The stone warmed slightly beneath me. The shadows receded a fraction, and in that heavy, suffocating calm, I was not alone. But I was safe. For now, I closed my eyes. The sound lingered, a companion in the quiet, and I wondered if it had always been here,